Okay, so I started looking at the New York law today, and I don't feel like I have a good enough grasp of the New York law to say anything about it, the New York abortion changes that they made. There are some things that I noticed that I think people are sort of blowing out of proportion. I don't know, the fact that nurses can provide abortions, I'm not going to say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's an understandable thing because the types of abortions they're providing are the pill. So basically, they're just handing you a pill and telling you to swallow it, and that's something that you don't really need a doctor to be doing. Things like that, I've looked at it and it's kind of like, well, it kind of makes just practical medical sense that they would make it like this. Other things I can see being more disturbing. I'm gonna look at it. I'm probably gonna have to make a video about it. I'm kind of not looking forward to that. I don't like laws. But one of the things that I've noticed in listening to people talk about it is I don't think people have a very clear idea of what fetal non-viability actually is. I hear a lot of people, they seem like they're floundering when they try to wrap their head around it, like, oh yeah, fetal non-viability, so say there's, you know, something wrong, and they don't know what that would be or what that would look like. I was gonna make a video today anyway about the headless, heartless baby, and I figure, yeah, let's talk about headless, heartless babies. I was poking around online after my son died, and I was trying to find the most fatal fetal anomalies that I could find. You know, things that you would definitely want to abort for. And I was looking at anencephaly, which means basically baby without a brain. It doesn't mean the baby doesn't have any brain. The top of the brain is missing. The brainstem is still intact, which keeps the heart beating. Which is also how babies with anencephaly can be born and live for as many as 6 years. That actually happened. But that baby was in a permanent coma. She was never going to wake up. And babies with anencephaly will never wake up. So, you know, that's usually they last like a few hours, sometimes a few days, and then they pass. And one of the great things about anencephaly is if you have a baby with anencephaly, you can always look into donating their organs, which I always want to mention because sometimes that helps. If you're the mom and you're going to lose your baby, sometimes that helps. But I didn't think there was anything else more deadly than that. I mean, how much worse can you get than not having a brain? And I found some other things that are just about as deadly, some of them quite horrific. And then I stumbled upon the asaphalic acardiac baby. Asaphalic meaning no head, acardiac, no heart. The heart is actually the important part. You can live without a head, at least in the womb, as long as you have something to pump blood for you. But if you don't have a heart, well, you need a twin. Not just a twin who shares an umbilical cord with you. And they refer to it as a pump twin. And the pump twin's heart will pump blood for both of them and keep them both alive. And from what I've read, usually doctors like to just kind of take a hands-off approach when they find that. They like to monitor closely to make sure that the pump twin's heart is still beating properly and not under any strain or not showing any signs of strain, because if it is strained, sometimes you'll end up with either stillborn babies or the pump twin will die shortly after birth because the strain on his or her heart has just been too much. But there are some things that can affect that if the asaphalic acardiac twin, this is also called a trap sequence. If you want to look it up, it's interesting. If the asaphalic twin grows too large, it can endanger the life of the healthy, viable twin because their heart won't be able to pump that much. It just puts too much strain on it, and then you have a dead baby. I think it was 60% is the point. Like if it's 60% the size of its twin, that's when things get really dicey. And I mean, it's a very rare thing. It happens when 1 in every 35,000 pregnancies, something like that. It hardly ever happens, but when it does, it can be interesting. Like I saw one that was just this little teeny blob, and it had a foot, and it was born alongside a very healthy baby boy, and the baby boy was fine, but there was also a little blob with a foot. And it was in the study that I was reading through, and it was really interesting because they referred to the parents of the babies like they were babies. Like they referred to them as parents and asked for the parents' permission to take the asaphalic twin to the lab to study it. And it was like, it's a baby. They actually acknowledged that it was a baby, and I thought that was awesome. But they get bigger than that. I saw one, it was an x-ray of an asaphalic, a cardiac baby, and it was fascinating. It was like a little teeny spinal cord, and there were the little teeny ribs sticking out, and it had little legs and little feet, and that was kind of it. That was what there was. Extremely non-viable. I don't think you get much more non-viable than that. In cases where the pump twin starts putting strain, or not the pump twin, the asaphalic twin starts putting strain on the pump twin's heart, what they do is they take a needle and they insert, God, so many needles, they insert it into the uterus, and they cauterize the umbilical cord of the asaphalic twin shut so that no more blood can move between the two. And this stops the growth. It stops the flow of nutrients. It keeps that baby from growing any further. And it allows the healthy, viable twin to survive. I don't know if that's even legally considered an abortion, because it could be argued that that is just a lump of tissue. I mean, going by my own logic, if conception is the beginning of life, which is what I covered in the last video, and I really do want to think of it that way for many, many reasons, you know, that would be a living baby. It would be an extremely non-viable baby. So I don't know. I mean, it could be argued both ways, but I think it's wonderful that there's a procedure where you can do that and prevent the death of a healthy baby. Like, the goal is still, at least for me, simple math, you know, keep as many patients alive as you can. So that's great, you know, that's wonderful. What happens if it's not an asaphalic twin? And that's where things get gray. I guess for some people, you know, aborting even an asaphalic baby would be, you know, kind of gray because it's an abortion, and abortions are all wrong for some people, but I'm looking for the gray area, and it just doesn't seem very gray to end that growth when it's entirely non-viable and entirely unable to survive on its own. However, sometimes it's a baby, like a complete and total whole baby, and there have been a few situations that I've read about where that's happened. There's not a lot of information on it because it's an extremely rare thing. It hardly ever happens. When it does happen, it's a mess. There was one case I read about. The babies shared an umbilical cord and they shared an amniotic sac. And the umbilical cords got tangled and one of them got knotted up, and it was causing troubles for one of the babies. He was declining very rapidly in health, and the doctor looked at it and said, if he dies, he'll lose all blood pressure, and the remaining twin will pump all of his blood into the dead twin and die as well. And so he went to the parents, he told them this, he's like, well, what do you want to do? And they ended up aborting the dying baby in order to maintain the health and safety of the not dying baby. And that's a terrible decision to have to make. they wanted those babies. They wanted both of them. But in the circumstances, they looked at it and it's like, we can't guarantee you're going to get any babies out of this pregnancy unless we do something. And those are fetal non-viability situations that can arise, and they're messy, and you need to take them on a case-by-case basis, because, well, what if they were far enough along that maybe they could induce? What if there was some chance that the affected twin could maybe pull through and survive? What if, too many what ifs. And so I think when people make laws regarding fetal non-viability, they leave them very open-ended, because it's a medical issue at that point. And medicine, it can be very tricky. It kind of has to occur on a case-by-case basis, because at that point, variables will affect how decisions are made. Unique variables, the health of the individuals involved, what kinds of situations they can find themselves in. I remember reading about one woman who had an abortion, and they never could diagnose what was wrong with her baby because they'd never seen it before. They knew he wouldn't survive, but they didn't know what to call it. They just knew it was deadly. But that's something else for another video. That's not the only case where twins will get into trouble. There's another story that I've read in multiple publications, like it just kind of made its way around, and it was a woman who, she had twins. One of her twins was growing very well and was very healthy. The other twin was experiencing many health problems. I can't remember all of the health problems, but I do remember one of them. She was suffering from microcephaly, which is a very small brain, too small head. And on top of that, her brain was forming outside of her head. And so the doctors were talking with her about what they could do to hopefully scoop her brains back into her skull. And basically, nothing good was going to come out of that. That's where you end up with basically another situation where your baby is going to be in a permanent coma. So they were telling her all of this, and then on top of that, just to make matters worse, the affected baby, her amniotic sac was growing, and it was growing too large, too fast, and it was crowding out the healthy baby, which was endangering the healthy baby's life. And so she ultimately decided, and it was a late-term abortion because at this point things were, pretty far along. She decided to have an abortive procedure on the affected twin in order to keep the healthy baby alive, because it was too much risk for the healthy baby, and the affected baby was not particularly viable. I don't know how likely it would have been that they could have even kept her alive once she was born. It's kind of funny how many times a human being can survive in the womb and not survive outside of it. But that was one of those cases, and it's very sad. The mother was sad. The family was sad. They loved that baby. They really wanted to meet her alive. They wanted her to be healthy and well, and it didn't happen. And so that's a gray area. That's a very gray area. It's like, you want to make the pro-life decision, but what is the pro-life decision if you're trying to keep the maximum number of patients alive? Everybody who's pro-life, well, not everybody, but a lot of people who are pro-life, they really hate the idea of abortion. But occasionally you get into one of these catch-22s where the abortion is the decisions that will lead you to more living patients. And it's unfortunate. And I'm sure, because this has happened a lot too, you know how when people argue cases where the mother's health is in danger, well, the mother's health is never in so much danger that she can't, find some alternative to abortion. They say that a lot. When it comes to late-term abortions, that's one of the arguments that I hear a lot. I want to pick that apart in a later video, but cases like this, I'm sure there are people who would probably look at it and say, oh, well, I'm sure that abortion wasn't necessarily the only option that would have kept the healthy baby alive. They can say that, but this is medicine. There are risks to avoiding to avoiding certain courses of action, and I mean, if those risks are too high, the chances that you're going to end up with 2 dead babies instead of 1, they're not. You don't want to push your luck with some of these things. You're playing around with human lives. You have to make a decision, and unfortunately you have to make a decision that you can live with. And I don't know how many parents are comfortable living with the idea of risking a healthy baby's life for the chance that a possibly dying baby won't endanger that life. It's too tricky. And again, it's a case-by-case basis. I would never say, you know, mandatory abortions for anybody. It's case-by-case. And that's something the doctors need to weigh out and then, you know, communicate to the patients, parents, also patients, but communicate to the parents as clearly as possible, and then, you know, make a plan, because this is a bad situation. So yeah, that's a gray area. That's twins. If you ever find you're carrying twins, don't worry. This doesn't happen very often. When it does, it's a nightmare. And so, you know, that's something to be aware of. That's the kind of decision making that, you know, your more late-term abortions tend to be that kind of situation. At least medical ones. I mean, there are other reasons women get late-term abortions. I'm going to look into those later. Right now, just medically speaking, that would be a reason. And that would actually be, I think, morally gray enough, because you are trying to save a life by taking a life. And it's not as simple and cut and dry as, well, is the mother willing to risk her life for her baby? Because some mothers would be perfectly willing to risk their own life, but when it's risking their baby's life, it gets even harder. But yeah, I thought I would share that with you. That's the story of the headless, heartless baby. They're interesting. They're really unfortunate. It's really sad, but you know, things happen with pregnancy. It doesn't always go the way you think it's gonna. I'll talk to you guys later.